The Zimbabwean president and current chairman of the Southern African Development Community, Robert Mugabe, has told off his country's citizens who found themselves in the crosshairs of this xenophobic violence in South Africa. But then, of course, that leads to the question, what alternatives do migrant laborers have? And can they really be faulted for just seeking better opportunities and a chance to make their lives a lot better? We'll be answering that question in a lot more detail tonight on Global Business Africa. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Here's what's coming up. Capital Markets Authority chiefs are meeting in Cairo. We'll tell you why. And it seems there's light at the end of the tunnel for Togolese inventor who aims to mass produce a palm nut processor. Right then, migration and xenophobia. These have been controversial topics over the last 4 weeks. Our starting point tonight is the SADC summit in Zimbabwe, where President Robert Gabriel Mugabe, no less, says migrants from South Africa's neighboring countries should go back home in order to diffuse xenophobic tensions and violence in South Africa. So far, 7 people have been killed in a wave of xenophobic attacks in April, which mostly targeted immigrants from elsewhere in Africa. President Mugabe said he was sorry for South Africa's predicament. His South African counterpart, Jacob Zuma, has blamed the political and economic conditions in South Africa's neighbors for the influx of immigrants into his country. President Mugabe is the current SADC chairman, and he says common solutions must be found.
The majority of our people who used to go to South Africa sometimes would go to the farms and work on the farms. When they've got a little money, then they run away from the farms and go into town and start new life in town. But why do that? Our people should not have the instinct of rushing into South Africa.
Now, an estimated 3 million Zimbabweans, of course, have left the country in search of better prospects elsewhere. Most of them left at the height of the country's economic problems in the early 2000s, but even today, there still are Zimbabweans who plan to leave. That said, there are some in the capital, Harare, who never left and do not plan on doing so, as Farai Mokutuya now reports.
The flight of skills and labor has taken its toll on Zimbabwe, especially in critical sectors like health and education. The country's youngest and brightest have left in droves. But Samuel Takawira has never stopped betting on his homeland. A journalist by profession, he's now working to tell the untold Zimbabwean story using a vehicle many of his contemporaries are familiar with. 263 Chat is Zimbabwe's first Twitter-based news service.
We write stories that are grassroots based, the stories that are not in the mainstream media. That's what we mainly focus on, because there's a voice that is being neglected in the mainstream media.
He believes his work is helping rebuild his country, one that he believes is laden with opportunities amidst the despondency.
We have incredible resources in Zimbabwe. Even though we have an economic meltdown, I think we can utilize that economic meltdown to create viable businesses. If we all go out of Zimbabwe, who will solve our problems? We have to be here and solve our problems.
Thousands of Zimbabweans all over the world take to 263 Chat every day for news, discussions and debates. Samuel says he interacts with hundreds of young Zimbabweans living abroad who want to return. But they are afraid to make the move because of the negative stories they hear about the country. Stories he says are not a true reflection of the situation on the ground. His message to the people he chats with abroad is simple yet telling.
Come back, let's build Zimbabwe from where we left it.
Farai Mokutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
South Africa's tourism sector fears April's wave of xenophobia will have a negative effect on the industry as a whole. The nation has worked fairly hard to improve its global brand, and it has spent years cleaning up its image as a hub for violent crime. By end 2013, tourism was South Africa's fastest growing economic sector and its third largest contributor to GDP. South Africa's government hopes it will generate nearly 500 billion rand a year in output by the end of the decade, and as well as nearly 250,000 new jobs. That, however, can only happen if South African authorities can reassure potential tourists, perhaps like you, that they will be safe regardless of their nationality. So far, though, some governments are not convinced. Australia, Botswana, China, the UK, all of those countries have one thing in common. They've issued travel warnings in regard to South Africa. Now, Brand South Africa, whose main objective is to market the country and promote investment in tourism, has now joined initiatives to condemn and quell this wave of xenophobic violence. The state-funded agency has joined President Jacob Zuma in pledging support to help South Africa rid itself of these events. Brand South Africa management say they are committed to a better Africa, and they're seeking support from African states, which provide over 60% of South Africa's incoming tourist traffic. However, there are reports suggesting that fresh looting of foreign-owned shops has been happening over the last few days in northern South Africa, despite the intensified crackdown on xenophobic violence altogether. Let's get some more details on this now, live from Angelo Coppola. He's live in Johannesburg with more data for us tonight. Angelo, let's look at the broader picture. What are the leading indicators, like booking levels, for example, showing us at the moment? Did we see a cancellation spike at any point in April?
Well, Raman, it's been an interesting exercise. The most recent data from the Tourism Business Council covers the first quarter of 2015. And in fact, if you'll recall, early in January, we had that very short wave of xenophobia happening in near Soweto. But the data stops at the end of March. So we don't have any accurate data in terms of what's happened over the last 3 weeks. But there is anecdotal evidence that people have cancelled their trips here. And as you just mentioned, people are concerned specifically with those travel advisories that have been issued. But as it stands right now, there's nothing definitive. And we're going to have to wait and see another couple of weeks. I was chatting to SA Tourism representative a little earlier, and she said to me there's no way that they can give you any kind of indication whether there was a spike in booking cancellations or not. Raman?
Indeed. Let's focus on the business of stopping the violence, ensuring that there will be consequences for this sort of thing. Going back to 2008, I understand there was only one murder conviction back then, despite over 500 arrests and the murder of 60 people. So how can South Africa's government claim it's doing all it can to deal with xenophobia when there's virtually, at least based on these numbers, virtually no punitive action for any such violence?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that no one was keen to answer. I kind of felt a bit like a rugby ball being passed from one person to another. But we do understand, as you probably are aware, that special courts and judges and prosecutors have been created and set up, and they're going to be operating in KwaZulu-Natal. Nothing up here in Gauteng just yet. We do know that the suspects in the Sithole murder have been remanded in jail. Interestingly, Raman, government released some very vague data related to the 2008 xenophobia attacks earlier this week. And it seems that they had 79 successful prosecutions, besides that one murder prosecution for public violence, robbery, housebreaking, assault and rape. But more worryingly for me is the Tourism Safety Initiative announcing a couple of days ago that some 350 people had been killed in xenophobic attacks since 2008. It's not a number that I don't see, I hardly ever see that number quoted anywhere. But in terms of the conviction rates, this time around, we're going to have to wait and see when those courts kick in and when the prosecutions and convictions start happening. Raman?
Indeed. Brande Said's acting CEO, she said that the organization is, and I'm quoting her here, very worried, end of quote, about the impact that this violence has had on the nation's brand image and brand equity. But she doesn't set policy. She's got very limited options here as far as turning around the situation is concerned, doesn't she?
Well, she does have very few options. She's about perception, she's about managing perception, but she did have a couple of kind of practical processes that could help, and which she seems to be advocating what the government's currently doing. First of all, she's suggesting that repatriation of undocumented foreigners must happen because it reduces tension in the communities that they're currently living in. She's suggesting also that the clampdown on criminal activity in some of the hotspots is also going to help to stabilize the situation. And perhaps her most important suggestion, which is currently being undertaken as well, is that government interact at grassroots level, at community level, to find out what's actually bugging the communities and trying to resolve them on a community basis. And she did remind me that the faith-based organizations in South Africa have declared May Reconciliation Month, where they're hoping to build a reconciliation factor in the country. But ironically, her last point probably was the most telling. She's suggesting that all of this visible policing and army presence should actually put tourists' minds at rest, because they're in there, they're patrolling, and they're keeping crime levels down. Raman?
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your input. That's Angela Coppola live in Johannesburg, South Africa. We'll certainly keep tabs on that story and bring you updates as it develops. Up in North Africa now, the black market for American dollars. It's back in full force in the streets of Cairo. And according to analysts, that's a fairly strong signal that Egypt is heading towards a second round of currency devaluation this year. They say that the strength of the dollar, the differentials between local and overseas listed shares, and the slide in the euro, these are all contributing factors. The return to business of traders offering the US currency for as much as 0.9% more than the official rate is now just adding additional pressure on the Egyptian pound and, by extension, the Central Bank of Egypt. Egypt has struggled with its foreign currency market since the 2011 spring, saw investors and tourists flee en masse, fueling the rise of a parallel market. Egypt, of course, remains dependent on aid from oil-producing Gulf allies to the tunes of billions of dollars to meet its obligations. At the same time, over 100 delegates representing 40 countries are in Cairo to work towards further developing emerging markets. The Global Emerging Capital Markets Committee aims to foster growth and at the same time minimize risk. Yasser Hakim was there.
The conference included a workshop for crisis management where real-life challenges were analyzed and how to learn from experiences of other emerging markets.
Here we discussed a lot of hot topics and there is a lot of issues being discussed a long time ago, and we try to reach a certain agreement on some of those issues. I mean, during the last 2 days we discussed through a closing meeting some of the issues related to the emerging and growth markets, and hopefully within that meetings we will be able to reach a certain consistency in rules and regulations and how we can develop our markets for the future.
Heads of emerging markets were in Egypt to also discuss their own challenges. For instance, African capital markets lack size and connectivity with the underlying economies. They depend on banks and donor agencies to fund their infrastructure and development. Kenya has addressed this issue.
Recently rolled out a 10-year capital markets master plan that's really looking at the structures that need to be put in place and the various steps that we need to follow to, one, make sure that our capital markets are much stronger linked to the underlying economy and the funding of devolution in our country, as well as looking at the critical reforms to the financial market infrastructure, being the available products, the exchange platforms, the settlement platforms, and the capacity of our intermediaries who are operating in our market.
The delegates hope this gathering can strengthen cooperation between financial institutions to help develop their economies.
We discussed risk, we discussed bond issues, and bond issues are particularly interesting, as in Egypt we have a lot of mega projects like Suez Canal, like seaports, like highways, like power stations we'd like to finance. So we were keen to know what's the best practice in debt issuance, what's the best practice in risk management.
The Egyptian capital market has suffered for the last 4 years due to political instability. There was an acute liquidity issue and not enough IPOs because of the uncertainty in the political scene. Experts say this is changing.
Finally, we've been seeing that we're coming close to the completion of the transitional period, the political transitional period, and we've already started seeing interest in the market. Last year, Egypt was the third best performing market globally, and finally we got to see our first IPO since 2010 issued last year, and 3 other IPOs were issued this year, and there's announcements of around another 7 by end of year. I think this should definitely add to the depth of the market and should draw more interest to it.
Experts say a number of emerging markets will be in the top 20 of world economies very soon. But first, they have to build the strength and resilience to overcome the continuous global market stresses. Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Now, we're also going over to Cairo to talk to Yasser Hakim, but not necessarily about the development of capital markets, more specifically about capital gains tax. It was introduced in the Egyptian market, and traders are not very happy about it. We'll find out why about it right now. Yasser, so far this year, the EGX 30 is down about 180 or so basis points. How much of that decline can we attribute to the introduction of capital gains tax?
Yes, traders are saying that a large portion of the decline is because of this tax. If you can give an example or proof, is that once the news came out that the Minister of Finance and Minister of Investment are going to meet with the head of the stock exchange in Egypt to discuss maybe abolishing the law, the gains increased, and there were profits at the end of today's session just on the news that they might revise the law. So it shows that this law and this tax has an effect on the market in the last few weeks.
Indeed. Walk us through the highlight of the plaint made by the traders. The headline complaint here is that the law is too complicated to implement in its current form. Tell us more about that.
It's not just the traders who are confused. Even the chairman of the stock exchange itself in Egypt himself, he said, I can't understand the law. There's a lot of confusion and several parts there that are not understandable, they're not clear. It's like 10% on the capital gains and dividends, but it's not straightforward. There are exemptions, several exemptions. For example, if there are losses, you don't pay for 3 years, and there's another law that says you don't pay in 5 years. So there's a contradiction there. Then there's an exemption if you own more than 25% of one of the companies and you're a long-term investor, then you don't pay, you are exempted from the tax. Foreigners are not exempted whether they make money or they lose. They will pay on any transaction or any operation they make in the market. How is the money collected, especially from individuals who do not have a tax file? Who will collect the money? A lot of parts in the law contradict with the tax law that's already in the country. One of which is that you pay a tax. You have to pay the tax in the stock market. You pay the taxes, or any company pays taxes before it distributes its profits. Now, this new tax law says that after distributing profits, there's a 10% tax. So they will pay taxes twice. Once before distributing the profits to the shareholders, and then the shareholders will pay another 10% on these profits. So there's a lot of confusion there.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being, but we'll keep tabs on that story. That's Yasser Hakim live in Cairo. We're going to be moving on fairly swiftly to the markets right now. Of course, quite a few parallels to be drawn here. We'll be comparing the story of capital gains tax in Kenya, capital gains tax in Egypt as well a little later. But for now, these are the numbers, of course, that Yasser was referring to a little earlier. The EGX 30 up by over 200 basis points in trading today in one single session alone. Now, keep in mind, of course, most of these markets won't be trading tomorrow for various reasons. Kenya, South Africa, there's a holiday, and of course in Egypt as well, it's a Friday, so of course markets over there don't trade. I'm looking forward to this story. We'll be telling you how prefabricated materials are turbocharging construction times. And this bank just can't shake off the ghost of alleged crimes past. Barclays and its provisions. All that data is coming up next.
This report by the African Green Revolution Alliance says climate change will slash food output. Within the next 30 years, the number of malnourished people in sub-Saharan Africa could jump nearly 40%.
Welcome back to the program. Now let's talk about construction, skyscrapers. They often take a very long time to put together. Take the Burj Khalifa, for example. All 160 plus floors of it took about 5 years plus to put together. But what if you could construct something about a third as tall in about 19 working days? That's exactly what a contractor in China managed to pull off. Of course, these 19 days weren't put together consecutively, but still a fascinating idea. We're looking at it on What's Hot Tonight.
The Broad Sustainable Building Company put up the rectangular glass and steel mini Sky City building in the Hunan provincial capital of Changsha using a modular method. And this time-lapse video of the rapid assembly has become popular on Chinese video sharing sites since it was first uploaded on YouTube. The company's vice president says workers assemble 3 floors a day in what it considers the world's fastest construction speed.
Our method of building skyscrapers guarantees a very fast speed of construction because 90% of construction materials are prefabricated into blocks in our factory, and workers just need to assemble these blocks at the construction site and they can do it really fast.
The company, which has ambitions to assemble the world's tallest skyscraper at 220 floors in only 3 months, worked on the mini Sky City in 2 spurts, separated by winter weather.
Compared to the traditional method of building skyscrapers, our method is a lot faster and efficient because most materials are prefabricated here in the factory. With the traditional method, they have to build a skyscraper brick by brick, but with our method, we just need to assemble the blocks.
Such modular approaches have been used for high-rise apartment blocks elsewhere, including in Britain and the United States. The Broad Sustainable Building Company says they are just as safe and reliable as traditional skyscrapers.
This building is absolutely safe and it has no problem resisting strong wind and earthquakes, and we can guarantee that all the people can be evacuated quickly should there be any fire accident. Safety is definitely guaranteed.
China has been undergoing a building boom in recent years, with many new buildings being constructed across the city. With so many buildings going up, some critics say the prefabricated method could lead to city skyscrapers with overly uniform architecture.
On the premise of the safety and reliability of skyscrapers, I think the modular construction method is worth developing and promoting because it's helpful for the fast construction of buildings. But it's not perfect, and it does not meet all kinds of personalized demands. Modular construction faces a big challenge in how we can design a primary component of skyscrapers to demonstrate their own styles, because people now want more personalized architecture.
Mini Sky City has 19 atriums, 800 apartments and office space for 4,000 people, and goes on sale in May. The Changsha-based company spent 4.5 months prefabricating the building's over 2,000 modules. The first 20 floors were completed last year. The remaining 37 were built between January and February this year. The company is awaiting approval for its 220-floor Sky City in Changsha. Valdi Karlse, CCTV.
Barclays, on the other hand, just cannot shake the ghost of bust blunders off. The British lenders announced it set aside another £800 million to cover potential settlements for related accusations of foreign exchange manipulation.
The spectre of regulatory action continues to hang over Barclays. The British lender has revealed it set aside an extra £800 million to cover potential fines for alleged foreign exchange manipulation. That brings the total amount of provisions to £2 billion, and there's still no settlement in sight. CEO Anthony Jenkins' efforts to overhaul the business and boost earnings have been hampered by ongoing probes. Under his watch, Barclays is working to shrink its investment banking division in favour of a return to its retail roots. But although the company's latest profit figures are in line with analysts' expectations, past misconduct issues may weigh on Jenkins for some time to come.
He's streamlined the bank, he's less reliant on investment banking, he's trying to cut costs by cutting about 19,000 jobs. All of those measures seem to be working and it's moving in the right direction, but it's just taking a long time, and it will probably take a period of several years to get past all of these legacy issues that are hurting the bank.
Barclays shares dropped more than 3% following the announcement, and investors may be bracing themselves for an even bigger hit.
Shareholders have to look at the underlying performance of the bank, but these fines look like they are going to continue, and 2015, many are predicting, could be one of the largest and worst years yet in terms of the actual dollar value of these fines.
The picture is looking brighter for new lender TSB. It was hived off from Lloyds Banking Group last summer. TSB reported higher first quarter profit thanks to increased mortgage applications and new customers. It's already agreed to be taken over by Spain's Sabadell, which aims to grow TSB into a potent challenger to Britain's high street banks.
Quick run through commodity prices here for you. With regard to coffee, that's posting some of the stronger numbers across the board, up by over 200 basis points. Oil prices, of course, more accurately, Brent crude futures, still hovering around $66 a barrel. Now, speaking of commodities, a young entrepreneur in Togo is using his technical know-how and innovative ideas to produce an array of products from palm nuts. Edward Capolado has invented what he calls the Merlinox. It's a machine that crushes palm nuts and produces juice, red oil and white oil. Now, while this multi-purpose invention is not yet on the market, it's already benefiting local communities.
Depuis 2000, quand j'étais en classe de 3e, que je me suis lancé.
I engaged in scientific and technological research since I was in high school. I used to make toys, boats, airplanes and cars. I had the opportunity to take part in the 6th National Salon of Invention and Technological Innovation, organized by the National Institute of Technological Cleanliness in Séville. There I discovered big machines in comparison with what I exhibited as toys, and I realized that there is still a long way to come. It is when coming back from this salon in 2012 that I really engaged in significant research and then invented Merlinox, the first prototype that I tested before the representatives of INPIT. After Merlinox, I did more research to create the Arari Comax, a sheller and then a coconut oil extraction machine, Ori Relaxa. Merlinox is used to crush 3 kilograms of palm nuts in 5 minutes. After the crushing, the mixture is collected that women can pour immediately in their cooking pot for the preparation of their sauce. But for a woman who wants to extract red oil, she must leave the mixture to rest and then after collect the oil that will overwhelm the water. My idea at the national level is to first enable the installation of a red oil production factory as well as palm kernel oil for exportation. Not only does Merlinox help to pound the palm nuts, it also crushes nuts and grinds the cobs to extract palm kernel oil. I hope to find funding for large-scale production of Merlinox in order to commercialize it. I appeal to all my brothers and colleagues because I know there are other inventors. We are young people who can push up this country to the international level. We can make the name of our country, Togo, known all over the world.
Let's make a quick run through currencies before we wrap up the program. The Kenyan shilling still very much in our crosshairs, weakening to fresh 3-year lows in trading today, hovering around 94.75, 94.85 at some point in intraday trading, strengthened just a bit around 94.60, as you can see on your screen right now. But that's it for this edition of the program. As always, thank you very much for watching. Do remember, though, you can send your feedback on the program to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And of course, as always, when we're off air, Facebook and Twitter are your ports of call. The news continues 24/7 over there. See you in 23 hours. I'm Ramanya.